I'm going to be reading a book to you today called Lost in Devil's Desert by Gloria Skrazinski. This is a book that I think will appeal to 4th through 6th graders, definitely. If you really like books about survival, such as Hatchet, I think you'll really enjoy this book. Chapter 1, The Old Mining Town. I looked at my military watch to check the time. Ever since my dad had given it to me a week earlier, I'd check the time about every 5 minutes. It was a great watch. The hours were numbered in digitals from 1 to 24, a whole day's worth. The watch had one function I tried to ignore. It told the date. Even though I didn't look, I knew it was June 16th. 5 more days and my dad would be gone. Miles of sand dotted the sagebrush skimmed past the car window. The sight of all the desert twisted my insides too, just the way the date on my watch did. In 5 days, we'd reach Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, where I'd say goodbye to my dad, maybe forever. He was being sent on a joint armed forces mission to the Middle East. I didn't know what the mission was because it was top secret, but Dad had just finished 2 months of intensive training in desert survival. "What time is it, Kevin?" Dad asked from the front seat. He smiled at Mom because he was kidding me. Dad had his own watch. 14:15, I answered. "That means 2:15. "We'll be in Spriggs pretty soon," Dad said. "Spriggs, Utah is where my great-grandmother lives." Since the town lies on the route to Nellis, we were planning to spend 3 days visiting Graham, as Dad calls her. Looking in the rearview mirror so that our eyes met, he said, "I think you're going to enjoy Spriggs, Kevin. You haven't seen it since you were too little to remember. The town is... anachronism is the best word I can think of. That means something that belongs to a different time. Spriggs is pretty much the way it looked 60 years ago when your great-grandfather worked in the silver mine." "Is it desert all around Spriggs?" I asked, "like this stuff we're driving through?" "Spriggs has trees and grass and a few gardens for irrigation," he answered. "But yes, it's in the middle of the desert, just like this." I glanced again at the flat sand outside and said, "Dad, you could stay alive in the Utah desert easier than in the Middle East, couldn't you? I mean, look, there's some plants growing out there." "Around here without water? You might survive for 24 hours. "No more desert talk, Bill, please," Mom said to Dad. Dad and I had been talking a lot about desert survival during the 3-day drive, and it was starting to get to Mom. She's a good military wife. I've heard Dad say that lots of times, but I guess enough was enough. Dad's a career officer in the Marines, so he's been gone away a lot. I always missed him when he was gone, but before this I never worried about him too much. Maybe it's because I'm older now, almost 12, but lately I've started to realize that my dad could get killed doing the job he does. Dad was quiet until the car rounded a curve in the highway. Then he announced, "Here it is, Kevin, Spriggs, Utah." "This is Spriggs?" I asked. "Wow, what a dump." We'd started to drive to Spriggs from the Oregon coast. Dad was on leave and he'd wanted a short vacation among some trees and ocean and all that training in the Mojave Desert. The difference between that beautiful ocean scenery and Spriggs was, well, the difference between a fancy aquarium and a chicken coop. On the main street of Spriggs, almost every other house was leaning sideways, ready to fall over. Some of them had fallen over. The narrow lots were full of bricks, boards, and broken glass. "Why does Graham stay here?" I asked. "It's home to her," Dad told me. "Graham has lived in Spriggs since she was a bride. It wasn't so shabby then. It was a busy mining town until the silver ran out." We turned on a short side street and parked in front of the funny old house where my great-grandmother lives. The porch sagged in the middle like a cantaloupe rind. A huge spruce tree filled the small front yard, looking strong and healthy next to the droopy wooden house. We climbed the rickety steps, and Mom was about to knock on the screen door, but she looked through the screen and smiled. "Graham's asleep in her chair," she whispered. "Let's go in quietly. We don't want to startle her." Inside, the house smelled old, musty with a whiff of sour. The living room was so small that when I'd taken 3 steps, I was right in front of the chair where my great-grandma dozed. She was tiny and old. Her face had many lines as a spider web. Her eyelids fluttered, and then she looked straight at me and said, "Bill, you're here." "I'm not Bill," I told her. "I'm Kevin." I didn't know old ladies could blush, but Gram did. She blushed and smiled, and in the smile her false teeth looked too big for her face. Of course you're Kevin, Gram said. I don't know what I could have been thinking. After she'd hugged me, then Mom and Dad, Gram set us down what she called a late lunch or an early supper, whichever you want to name it. She hurried around, bringing us plates of ham, sliced tomatoes, deviled eggs, and something she called pickle lily. Then she hovered behind our chairs to make sure that our plates were full. That was great, Gram, Dad said after all had eaten so much as we could hold. Just like I remembered. Now, if you ladies don't mind, I think we men folks will leave for a while. I want to take Kevin to meet Barney. That old reprobate, Gram snorted. He's a boozer and a cusser. Mom and Dad both laughed. Heavens, Mom said. This Barney sounds like he'll be a bad influence on Kevin. Since we're only going to be here for 3 days, Dad answered, Kevin can take his chances. Gram was still tisking as Dad and I walked down the porch steps, hearing the screen door squeak shut behind us. Chapter 2 is called Barney's Junk Pile. I think you'll want to read this for yourself and find out what happens next. Thank you. Lost in Devil's Desert.